It's broadcasting on Spice FM and KTN Home, as well as on www.spicefm.co.ke and Spice FM KE on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. As we begin this hour, let's hear today's proverb. CT.
A man with a running stomach, or should we say diarrhea, will not require anyone to give them directions to the door.
A man with diarrhea will not require anyone to give them directions to the door.
No, they won't. It's a condition that requires a certain element of urgency when it comes to movement.
You will find the door.
Put it this way, you will certainly find the door.
All right.
Yes.
Continuing the conversation around the Constitution, today being the 27th day of August 2020. It's 10 years today since the promulgation of the Constitution 10 years ago. And remember, in the previous hour, we were speaking with Professor PLO Lumumba, who was the former secretary of the CKRC. Now let's speak to the person who was the Justice Minister in the second trial at this Constitution. Now, let's just call it the second trial. It maybe that must have been like the seventh trial, but let's just say in this new push to have a new Constitution. Martha Karua joins us on the line. Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to the Situation Room. It's good to have you again.
Good morning.
Morning, and thank you for having me.
So, Ms. Karua, we were looking at the journey through, the Bomas draft, what happened in Bomas. Then, of course, we know what happened after that. 2005 referendum, the vote no carries the day. The no vote carries the day. And then we have the 2007 general election. We know the acrimony that followed that, the peace and reconciliation that came after that. And you are Justice Minister since 2006. When we got now into the new government, the Grand Coalition government, you were Justice Minister, and there was a fresh push to now have the new Constitution at least enacted. One thing that we all know is that there was a law that was passed in Parliament that was, like self-executing, definite timelines. This thing of promising a Constitution with no deadline in place was not the case this particular time. Why was that?
I think we realized that there were too many hurdles on the way, too many people not wanting the Constitution, pretending to want it, but lying in wait to sabotage. So I and the team at the Ministry of Justice had to think of an innovative law that is self-propelling, that has strict timelines. We wanted the Constitution done in 1 year. That was the agreement in the Grand Coalition government. Mm-hmm. I was chairing the team of 6 that were in Serena to craft the necessary laws on behalf of the coalition government. But credit goes to the team in the Ministry of Justice at that time. They helped craft that law that enabled us to keep the timelines and to complete the constitutional journey, the unfinished business, within 1 year.
Even as you made this push, Madam Mheshimiwa, were you of the understanding that this particular draft that was being pushed forward was the best draft that we could have had at the time?
The draft that was being pushed was a draft that we were to agree on. The 1 year was time to negotiate what to put into the Constitution. We had as materials the Bomas draft, the WACO draft, and all the views that Kenyans had given, which had already been collated. So we had the opportunity also for Kenyans to give additional views on what they wanted. And that's exactly what happened within that 1 year. All the views that Kenyans had from hindsight were received. The materials that previously had been gathered were looked into, and a draft was put forward by the committee of experts.
As you and your team were working on this at the Justice Ministry and looking at, we want to have a new constitution, at least we want to get to a point where the people are voting for a new constitution within a year, was there any consideration given that perhaps then what we should do is look at what the work that had been done at Bomas of Kenya and just take it to the people?
No, you see, this constitution push was people driven from day one. So there was no case of experts sitting and deciding what to give the people. You allow the people to give any additional views they have, to make any other additional comments, and together with the previous materials, you now come up with a draft, which again is subjected to a referendum for the people to authorize, and that's exactly what happened. So I would like Kenyans to remember that this constitution was a negotiated document. The journey was 20 years plus, and at every stage of the way, people had a say. Constitution making is not about top leadership deciding what is good for the nation. It's about the nation deciding for itself, the citizens playing a role in shaping their destiny. And that's exactly what was done in the constitution making leading up to the 2010 constitution.
How did your role, Martha, at that point as Justice Minister contribute to this? And do you think that had you not pushed in the manner in which you did, within that year, this constitution would not have been birthed?
My role was to be a team leader, because we must rely always on the wealth of human resources and other resources that we have. So I sat down with my team and I relied on their expertise. We put our heads together and we proposed a draft to the government. It was accepted and it was tabled in Parliament, and the rest is history.
Mm-hmm.
Let's take people back to that journey. Sorry, let's just take people. There are some people who may have forgotten that there were three documents here that we're talking about. We're talking about the Bomas draft, then we're talking about the Kilifi draft, and then we ended up with a harmonized draft constitution of the Committee of Experts. So just take us through this journey when now the Grand Coalition government is in place, and the strategy that you deployed on how we are going to end up with a draft for the constitution in 2010 August.
One, as I've said before, we were conscious that this journey is the people's journey. It's not the journey of the top leadership. We were aware that we cannot ignore the previous work leading up to the Bomas draft. A lot of effort had been put in by Kenyans. We also did not want to ignore the 2005 referendum, which had a ratio of, say, 56-44%. We wanted all those things put into perspective and Kenyans given a chance to say what they would want to see in the constitution so that nobody is locked out. It wasn't a question of saying those who won at the 2005 referendum should carry the day. It's about bringing people together, let them negotiate with hindsight what it is that they want in the constitution, the kind of nation they want backed by the new constitutional order. And that's what we did. And you remember this was after a Grand Coalition government had been born by the Kofi Annan negotiations. We had learned our lesson that Kenya is shared space for all of us, and anything that is fundamental has to be negotiated, and we have to look for a broad consensus. And that's precisely what we did.
Do you think the mood of the country at that point, because of coming out of the 2007 post-election violence, do you think the mood of the country that now we were in a mode of consensus helped to propel this journey?
Yes, and the fact that there was a Grand Coalition government, we were committed right from the negotiation table to an agenda. And one of the agendas of the Grand Coalition government was to ensure that the constitutional review was complete. So that unity of purpose definitely did help.
Now, looking at the constitution, and then the Committee of Experts presented the harmonized draft. This was taken through another political process in Naivasha. Just take us through, why did the draft need to go to politicians sitting somewhere in Naivasha to negotiate and look at it?
within the Review Act, there was space for Parliament to input. And you never can ignore Parliament. Parliament should not be the only driver, but being an institution recognized and one of the three arms of government, Parliament always has a role. Therefore, the Review Act provided that after the Committee of Experts puts a document together, it will be subjected to a parliamentary process and ultimate parliamentary approval, because you can't take it back to all the Kenyans to see before it's subjected to a referendum. So Naivasha was a legitimate process. And in Naivasha, we did some input to the Committee of Experts. And basically, what we agreed on Naivasha carried the day, although there are some little things the Committee of Experts removed. Mm-hmm. I hear the former Chair Nzamba complaining that there are some things we removed at Naivasha. Naivasha was a legitimate process, and we did what we believed was necessary at that time. And in hindsight, I still think what we did was very good, and that is what led to this beautiful document, the 2010 Constitution. The Committee of Experts was proposing regions. It had 14 of them.
Yep.
And as parliamentarians, we thought we were already balkanized. And we thought if we group it into regions, which is basically like the former provinces added, we thought it may lead to further balkanization. And we therefore opted for counties. We also opted not for a federal system, for devolution, but with a unitary state. Also, again, because of the background of balkanization. Mm-hmm. And the rest is history. That's how the 47 counties were birthed, basically around the old colonial districts, except that we added 2 more counties. And if I remember correctly, that was Vihiga and Lamu, which were not part of the old colonial districts.
When we spoke with Professor P.L.O. Lumumba in the previous hour, one of the things that he kept wondering is, how did we end up with the 47 instead of even the 14 regions? Because he says that during the Bomas process, one of the things that was coming out was, if you go lower than that, then you are going into tribal. But if you stay at regional, then you're bringing in various tribal groupings that are in the same vicinity as a region, working together to form a government. But now going into 47, you have gone into uniquely tribal areas. What do you say to that?
We are already there. I do not think we have gone to uniquely tribal areas. Although the districts may have a majority coming from one community, there is a provision that in everything you do, there has to be inclusion, and you have to look at the face of Kenya. You have to look at the composition of the people who live within your boundaries. And remember, this is a unitary state, not a federal system. So I believe that having counties avoided the balkanization that had been brought by our politics. We would now be grouping against one another. But because it is counties, every county is busy minding its business. And I don't think our problem right now is ethnic blocks within the counties. Our problem is mismanagement. So it actually vindicates our thoughts at Naivasha.
But where is the problem with ethnic blocks, really, honestly speaking? Where is the problem? I personally don't see it.
I don't think we see problems. We were seeing problems in ethnic blocks. We were seeing problems in coming together of ethnic groups to lock out others, not for development. And this fear was born out of our balkanization in politics. Yeah.
But, which system of government would we opt for that would remove it completely? Because it's something, whether we're talking about the historical influence or they're talking about just the reality of our politics, It is how people will move politically. Because what seems implied here is what falls in the category of what you call negative ethnicity, where just by virtue of your birthplace and your background, you will be discriminated against, or you will have an undue advantage. But this need not necessarily be the case, because from where I sit, this current county system that we have actually enables people in whatever groupings they are in to actually have the ability to determine or chart their way forward. That's how I see it.
Yes, we thought, just like I've said, we thought the counties will give that opportunity. And the fact that we took the districts, all districts as counties, and rooted for a unitary state.
Yeah.
The unitary state was a check on any ethnic blocks that tend to lock out anyone else. So the emphasis here is a unitary state. And we actually thought even security cannot be devolved until maybe we'll reach a place in future where we can trust ourselves and one another. We thought we needed to have security at the national level because we feared that we could end up with county security that ends up like a militia. And you can see as we are, governance, good governance, has not taken root yet. Most of the counties, we are having mismanagement of resources. We are still having neighbors fighting one another. Those were the issues that informed our actions at Naivasha. And we also realized that some of the balkanization has come because of the differentials in development in many of our counties. And we therefore, and I'm proud to have been the one who introduced at Naivasha, Article 104, the Equalization Fund, which I had borrowed from the Canadian Constitution to ensure that we accelerate development in the hitherto marginalized areas so that Kenya can be one in terms of development. It is unfortunate that the Jubilee administration has not, for the 8 years they have been in power, operationalized this fund to the extent of 8 starting infrastructure projects in the marginalized areas to ensure that they are brought to par with the rest of the country. This fund is time-bound. It is for 20 years, and then we review it. We are now into the 10th year without this fund doing anything tangible and without serious money being put into this fund, because infrastructure projects, roads, water, hospitals, and whatever you like, are projects that would cost a lot of money. So putting in 8 years, just about 25 billion in this fund is really shows lack of commitment by the Jubilee administration. Failing to utilize it now completely indicates that either they do not appreciate the need for having the country as nearly equal as possible, or they do not realize that proper utilization of this fund will bring or contribute to cohesion.
In fact, that fund now comes squarely at this point when we are having this whole conversation about the third basis formula and looking at the marginalized counties and how the marginalized counties should be working, which brings us to the conversation of the day today, which is a scorecard on the implementation of this constitution 10 years down the road. We'll be looking at the details of each. For example, you've just told us the equalization fund, which is time bound. Within 20 years, we review and see whether we need to continue giving the counties that amount of money. But so far, they have only received a drop in the ocean of this money. Why is it that we don't see that conversation even coming from the counties that are set to benefit from this equalization fund?
I think there is a disconnect on our understanding of the Constitution. I have seen the push and pull in Senate of a revenue allocation. I have not heard any of the senators wonder where the equalization fund is. The state of being underdeveloped is not a state we wish to remain permanent in parts of this country. And therefore, the biggest question to the government would be, as we fight with the yearly revenue, where is the equalization fund? Why have we not implemented it? And this is something that brings us closer to equality in terms of development. But you will see that it's not just about development that we lack equality. The Constitution provides for inclusion. We were having governments that never had inclusion, were excluding some people, some sectors. We now are moving to inclusion in the new Constitution. But we can see that the gender rule has not been implemented, which was meant to bring inclusion of genders in leadership and especially in parliament. We can see that certain things which are supposed to be done to facilitate those living with disabilities to participate in all spheres of life as well as other people have not been done. For instance, in public transport, entrances to buildings, on the pavement, many things. We can see that Article 43, which is supposed to be social and economic rights, which are access to adequate food, access to housing, access to education, to health, to water and sanitation, to name but a few. You can see that the implementation is lacking. The government, to its credit, has instituted cash transfer programs, which are to tackle those inequalities in accessing basic needs. But it's so badly done that when they say that over 70 will receive social support, not everybody is receiving. When they say orphans are receiving, you wonder which orphans, because you will know several who are not receiving. When they talk of people with severe disabilities, we know so many who are not receiving. We need to make this applicable to all those who need it, so that no Kenyan sleeps hungry, no Kenyan suffers without shelter.
Yep.
The social welfare program has to be well planned, and nobody can tell me we cannot afford it. The amount of money, 1/3 of the budget, which goes to mismanagement and outright theft yearly, it's just a matter of planning, a matter of again implementing the Constitution to ensure prudent use of resources.
Discussing the implementation of the Constitution of Kenya 2010 and giving a scorecard is Martha Karua, the party leader of Narc-Kenya, who was the Justice Minister during the time when the new clamor, the new push for a new constitution was reignited in the Grand Coalition government. Justice Minister between 2006 and 2009. This is the Situation Room. It's Kenya's biggest conversation. In the room, you have C.T. Muga, Nduoko, Eric Latif. This Situation Room broadcast on Spice FM and is on KTN Home as well for this hour. And on the line, we are joined by Martha Karua, Narc-Kenya party leader, Justice Minister 2006 to 2009. She is also somebody who really advocates for social justice. She fights for all these things. And Mheshimiwa, let's look at now the implementation of this constitution since 27th of August 2010 to now, 10 years later. Giving a scorecard on the implementation from the latter years of the Grand Coalition government into this 7 years, 8 years or so of the Jubilee administration, where 100% is the maximum you can give, and a pass mark is 65%. What would you give?
I would give 30%.
30.
Because even things, yes, it appears harsh, but I'll explain to you why. Even things that look obvious are no longer obvious. This constitution was supposed to bring us from impunity to a country that upholds the rule of law. We have seen in recent times a reversal of the gains in the constitution. Extrajudicial killings are still a big problem. So the government, through the law enforcement agencies, instead of upholding and protecting the rights of its citizens, is the number one violator of the fundamental rights of its citizens. And it's not just about during arrest. Look at what has happened this week on the eve of celebration of the 10th anniversary of the Constitution. People who are demonstrating countrywide against the death of COVID funds are being beaten up by the police, brutalized, tear gas, and these are peaceful demonstrations, rights entrenched in the Constitution, and the police have time to harass peaceful citizens expressing themselves, but not time to quickly arrest the COVID millionaires. So I really think that because of certain violations which are so blatant, I would give 30%, meaning that there are structures the government has set in accordance with the Constitution, but they don't appear to believe in it. Look at devolution. I was just talking about non-implementation of the Equalization Fund. Look at how the counties have been forced to take leased medical equipment, decisions that should have been taken by the counties, procurement that should have been done by the counties. The center is still holding on to the money. If you look at the chapter on how to utilize public finance, we have still not moved to transparency and accountability. Look at the chapter on leadership and integrity, hardly implemented. We are having people accused of economic crimes and serious criminal offenses like murder still serving in office. It is unheard of anywhere. If you look at the many, many key things in the Constitution, people's participation, it has not been fully embraced, and people's voices are still unheard. That is why the president can tell us that he sees a constitutional moment, him as an individual and his people, his cronies, not the citizens. The Constitution gives the power to the people. Those at the center have grabbed power from the people. The people of Kenya, this is a wake-up call. We must take our power back. And that's what citizens are trying to do.
What do you think are we looking at a lack of political will, or really how far the rot has eaten in when it comes to impunity and things like corruption? Is that the reason why, or are those the hindrances to implementation of some of these things that we are looking at now? Or could there be something else?
It's lack of political will. Anybody enthusiastic about implementation of the Constitution would take time to understand what people agreed on, what the covenant between those in authority and the people is, because that is in the Constitution, and would endeavor to faithfully implement. I see an effort not to implement, but to disobey anything that is in the Constitution. The government is again number one, the executive, in disobeying court orders. If you look at the prosecutions, certain prosecutions do appear to be political. If it is during this COVID season, the prosecutions that have arisen out of disobeying the social distancing rules are skewed. For people who are favored by the government, they can do as they please. They can violate all the COVID rules and they will not be arrested. People who are out of favor are being arrested. We want to see even-handedness in the application of the law. And this also goes for serious offenses. We are fighting corruption, but even that fight is skewed. There are some people who are known to be to have committed corruption offenses who walk scot-free, and there are others who are in court. We want to see even-handedness in all these things. So we really have a deep problem. It is not one area that lacks implementation. It's generally that the Jubilee administration has trashed the 2010 Constitution. We as a people must face up to them and make our voices heard that we want the Constitution implemented before any talk of amending it. If you cannot implement what we have, then you are likely not to even honor what you bring.
You talked about the time for Kenyans to then be able to take this bull by the horns, essentially.
Yes.
You're at a unique position now where you're on the other side of things, having been in government before. If you were in government at this point and there is a clamor for Kenyan citizens to take this bull by the horn, what would that look like? What would it look like then for you to be able to say, look here, guys, Kenyans are asking for something and we are at a position and we have an opportunity to actually make this happen? What would it look like in that decision-making seat area that would say, you know what,
think
we need to do this?
A leader who obeys their oath of office and honors their oath of office, because the president and all people in government, state officers, have sworn to uphold and defend the Constitution. This is a moment that calls for each leader to be true to their oath of office, to protect and defend the Constitution. Protecting and defending the Constitution, or upholding and defending the Constitution, is actually implementing it and living it. So the government is called upon to live the Constitution. You cannot just take the part of the Constitution that sets up your office, gives you the power, but reject what benefits the people. That's what we are seeing, and that is impunity reloaded. And we really have to hold our leaders to account. And I am glad I'm speaking at a time Kenyans have found their voices. Increasingly, we are seeing people taking action, not just the demonstrations, but if you listen to the conversation around the webinar, people are holding government to account. We call upon people of goodwill to upscale this. The government must feel the weight of the people, and they must act in accordance with the Constitution.
Now that the political class seems to be speaking from and reading from the same page, then the onus is on the civil society as well to take the leadership on this. Do you feel that the civil society is alive to the moment?
Yes, I do feel that. I have said we have seen increased activity, and I think that a time is coming when people who are progressive, who agree that we must defend this Constitution and ensure that it's implemented, will increase the pace of the action that they take, and also we'll come together, because we need to consolidate our efforts to push for the faithful implementation of the Constitution, to push for the transformation we envisaged to be availed by the 2010 Constitution.
Mheshimiwa, if we look at if I were to take what you've said at face value,
Yeah.
would I be right in assuming that what you're actually saying is that this government has actually failed?
Yes, I think even in the last statement we made as Narc-Kenya, we said this government has practically not just failed, but collapsed.
So how then do we see the possibility of an implementation of this Constitution as we know it happening if it's the same government that is still in power?
What I have said is that President Uhuru Kenyatta has 2 years to the end of his term.
It's actually less.
This is the slightly less. This is a window, the last window of opportunity he has to redeem himself and his government. He can do something to return the country to the path of right. And it's never too late to do the right thing. He may not achieve much, but just beginning the journey to implement faithfully the Constitution, returning the country to the rule of law and fighting impunity, ensuring that people's voices are heard, ensuring there is inclusiveness, not exclusion, those will be good steps for starters. If not, it is time also for us as Kenyans to have a conversation with ourselves about how we elect leaders, about what we need to do to ensure that we will not come from the Jubilee administration to a worse regime, that we purposely elect in a manner that will help the country come out of the situation of the quagmire we are in. And when I talk of elections, it's from the lowest office to the highest. We have a tendency in this country to over-concentrate on presidential elections only. But my message on this 10th anniversary to fellow citizens is that what matters most in your daily life are things your county government should be doing for you. County government was brought near you so that they can ensure the health care works for you, so that they can ensure your rural access roads are better. They can ensure you have access to water and sanitation. They can ensure that you can take your produce to the market and that you have support for your agricultural extension services, and agriculture here covers livestock. Therefore, if you do not elect good MCAs and a good governor, leaders of integrity, you will suffer even though the money is disbursed from the national government. We also need to elect good people at the national level, a good MP, a good woman representative, a good senator. All the 6 seats should be populated by leaders of integrity. Let us put values and what people stand for ahead of money, because Kenyan elections have turned into a contest of who has more money than the other.
I mean, beyond pointing out the failings of this government, which I feel are patently obvious, what do the other political parties in this country think and feel they should do? I say this because the Mwananchi tends to listen to their political leaders.
That is why, as Narc-Kenya, we are putting forward what we think should be done. And we are engaging not just at the national level, but also at the grassroots level with our people. And I think it is time for parties to up their game. All these successes would not happen without complicity of the major parties represented in Parliament. Because Parliament is a watchdog of the people. Parliament is supposed to put government on its toes, but Parliament has been co-opted by the executive. And therefore we have lost a valuable watchdog. We have seen the Senate in this debate of revenue allocation attempting to free itself from the clutches of the executive. I do hope that they take this issue of their independence and assertiveness as seriously as they do at this time moving forward. And I'm reminding the National Assembly that they too can do the same. The county assemblies, they too can do the same. We need vibrant watchdogs, and we need a vibrant civil society that puts the government on its toes and stops the government excesses. And to the civil society, I want to say, yes, you're on the right track. Let's upscale the activities.
Let's have a conversation about political parties and their role. When you talk about implementation of this constitution, there's a political class, which is not just the executive and the party in power, but also all the other political parties. Do you feel that the political parties, the many political parties in this country, have also blame to carry over the 30% that you give the implementation process?
I think to varying degrees. Take, for instance, my party, which doesn't have a single member of parliament. So how would we then be able to hold the national government to account in parliament? We have representation in various county assemblies, 8 to be precise. Where we have a sizable number, we really also must play our role and we must be audited. But the two parties who carry the heaviest responsibility are Jubilee and ODM, who dominate a majority of the county assemblies. There are parties like ANC, who may also have a majority in 1 or 2 county assemblies, KANU. So there are parties that have responsibility in 1 or 2 assemblies. But for the National Assembly and Senate, it is mainly Jubilee, and ODM. That is not to say that those of us without much representation cannot do something. We are raising our voices and speaking for the party I lead, Narc-Kenya. We are raising our voices way above the numbers elected on our ticket. And I'm encouraging other parties to also raise voices, irrespective of whether they have representation in parliament or not, in the county assemblies or not. And this space is not just for political parties. It is for every Kenyan, even as individuals. We need to have our voices count. Yes.
As CT said, Kenyans will listen to their political leaders because there's a level of trust that we have in our political leaders. Is there space, is there a platform that political parties can come together, even those without representation in the Houses of Parliament, where they can raise their voice, where they can play a watchdog role?
Yes, we have a platform, the Center for Multi-Party Development, CMD, where we come together as political parties and where we draw a common agenda. And in the last People's Dialogue Festival hosted by the CMD, we did suggest that they should start hosting quarterly breakfast meetings for political party leaders where we can discuss issues of national importance and the direction the country is taking, the lack of implementation of the Constitution. Those are issues we can discuss. The issue of having a credible electoral process before the next election. Because I believe that Article 86 and 81 and all laws relating to the electoral process have not been implemented. We are using rules even in the courts that were made with the old regime in mind before the Constitution spelled out that elections have to be transparent, they have to be accurate, records have to be kept. We need to come together as political parties and help our country to make corrections in the electoral process. And when I say this, it's not by way of constitutional amendment, by way of amending our laws and rules to ensure that they conform with the Constitution and to help us have credible elections. We do have a role, yes.
But is it possible really for our political players, those with big parties, small parties, aspiring politicians, is it possible for the Kenyan politician to actually put aside their selfish interests? Because with all the good intention in the world, this always seems to get in the way.
It happens only when people, the citizen, is sufficiently mobilized. The threat of losing power is what brings the political class together to make pro-people amendments. If you see our history, in 1997, we came together as parliament in the Inter-Party Parliamentary Group, IPPG. Why? Civil society had organized so much outside, and some of the political class had joined the civil society because really they had strength. And at that time, we came together as parliament and made some profound changes to the Constitution and to our laws to enlarge the democratic space. We were faced with a situation where our relevance as an institution, as parliament, was in question. If you look at Kanu government in 2000 and in 1991 December, when Section 2A was repealed to bring back multi-party democracy, they were threatened by the opposition push together with civil society. They were threatened by being overrun by loss of power, and they agreed to the change to the Constitution to return plural democracy. If you look at the push for the Constitution was not willingly brought in by the political class. It is that the clamor, the push, the strength of the people was too much. And the political class had no option but to listen and obey to the dictates of the people. So yes, it is possible, and the people always triumph. It may take time, but the people always win. So I want to remind us as Kenyans, we've done this before, we've succeeded before, we can, we will, and we must succeed in turning around our country, in achieving the dream of the 2010 Constitution.
Martha Karua, I want to thank you very much for speaking to us today. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for, always reminding the citizens that the journey ahead is still a long journey. And as we finish on this, I'd like to ask just a final question on what you talked about. This is a moment for the president. He has 2 years or less. It's a moment for him to grab this and see how best then can he steer the country towards the better implementation and realization of the constitutional dream. Do you think not that's what he has in mind when, for example, he said yesterday that we are in a constitutional moment, that this is a time for us to have this conversation to see what is working and what is not working and not be stuck in this constitutional rigidity? Don't you think that this is an opportunity that he's actually also seeing and he's seizing, and maybe it's an opportunity for the rest of the country to take?
With the greatest respect to the president, he appears to be the one stuck on his constitutional moment, which is not really a constitutional moment, because a constitutional moment is when there is a general consensus that it is necessary to bring changes to the constitution. The last polls done on the BBI, it is about 1% of Kenyans who thought it was important. How then can he be talking of a constitutional moment where only him and those close to him, his political allies, are seeing the constitutional moment? The rest of the country is saying this is not our priority. I want to appeal to the president not to be rigid. I want to just use the language you used yesterday. With respect, Mr. President, don't be stuck on the BBI. Listen to the people. That is your role. Listen to the mood on the ground and do things that are of critical importance and priority to the people of Kenya. This is your last window of opportunity. Otherwise, you go on record as the president who tried to subvert the will of the people. And to us as Kenyans, it is our moment to remind the government and to assert our supremacy, to ensure that the will of Kenyans is done.
Thank you very much. Martha Karua, party leader, Narc-Kenya, and also Justice Minister, 2006 to 2009. Still very active on the political and national leadership front and fighting for social justice. We thank you very much for joining us. We hope we'll be speaking to you again. We enjoy having conversations with you.
I enjoy having conversation with you. You are my favorite station. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Asante sana.